History isn't written by the victors. That's a pretty lie for the textbooks. History is written by the survivors. And in this story, there were almost no survivors. We love to think of the past in black and white, heroes and villains, good and evil, but the truth, as always, is gray, and it's filthy. It smells of unwashed bodies, fear, and sour wine. And today, we're diving into one of the most insane, most tragic, and most cynically sold stories of the Middle Ages. A story the official church would rather forget. This isn't a story about knights in shining armor. This is a story about children, thousands of them, and how their faith was turned into a product and sold to the highest bidder.
Welcome to the year 1212. To understand what's about to happen, you need to understand the world we're in. Forget human rights. Forget social safety nets. Imagine a world where your life will, in all likelihood, be over before you're 30, where 90% of the population are illiterate peasants, tied to the land. This isn't slavery like in 19th century America. No, it's worse. It's serfdom. You aren't the property of a specific person. You're the property of the land. You're an add-on to the farm. You're living inventory. The atmosphere? Imagine a constant, low-frequency hum of fear. Fear of starvation. Fear of disease. Any scratch could kill you. And looming over all of it, the all-consuming fear of God's wrath. Hell isn't a metaphor. Hell is a real place you are almost certainly going. And the church reminds you of it every single day. And in this world, there is one big, obsessive idea. A brand, a franchise that's been running for over 100 years. The Crusades. You have to understand, the Crusades were the Marvel Cinematic Universe of their time. The first movie, The First Crusade, was a certified blockbuster. They took Jerusalem, created kingdoms, total success. But then, the sequels just kept getting worse. Imagine the US Army being sent to defend an ally, and instead, they just loot London. That's the level of scandal we're talking about. Disappointment was in the air. Despair. A feeling that the adults had screwed everything up. The knights were sellouts. The kings were greedy. The bishops were cynical politicians. The system was rotten. God had turned his back on them because they were sinners. And into this vacuum of hope, this scorched earth of faith, come the children.
His name was Stephen of Cloyes, a common shepherd boy, illiterate, grimy, but with fire in his eyes. One day, as the legend goes, while he was tending his sheep, a pilgrim appeared to him. He identified himself as Jesus and gave Stephen a letter for the King of France. Stephen goes to town and starts preaching. And his message is pure marketing genius, hitting the exact right nerve. He says the adults have failed because their hearts are full of sin and greed. The knights can't win back Jerusalem because they are impure. But we are children. We are innocent. Our purity is our ultimate weapon. We don't need swords and armor. We will walk to the sea and it will part for us just like it did for Moses. We will walk to the Holy Land, and the Saracens, seeing our faith, will convert to Christianity and give us Jerusalem. Think about this from a PR perspective. It's flawless. It's a viral campaign in a world without the internet. It appeals to the era's greatest scarcity: hope. Parents who have lost everything, who bury their children every day, see this as a sign. Priests, tired of the cynicism of their bishops, see true faith. And the children, oh, the children see the grandest adventure of their short, bleak lives. And the virus spreads. From France, it jumps to Germany. There a prophet of their own emerges, a boy named Nicholas of Cologne. His message is nearly identical. Innocence, a miracle, a parted sea. He too gathers an army of children.
And this is where the official version, the one written in the Chronicles, starts to fall apart. The church scribes called them pueri, boys, children. But when you dig deeper, you see it wasn't just a crowd of 10-year-olds, it was teenagers, young men, landless peasants, the urban poor, women, the elderly, all the people the system had cast aside, everyone with nothing left to lose. This wasn't a children's crusade. This was a crusade of the desperate. And so they walked. Tens of thousands of them. Imagine the scene. Two giant, disorganized mobs shuffling across medieval Europe. No food, no supplies, no guards. It was a death march. They sang psalms, but their hymns were drowned out by the cries of the hungry and the moans of the sick. They ate bark off trees and grass from the fields. They were stalked by wolves, and not just a four-legged kind. They were attacked by bandits. Local townspeople, seeing this swarm of hungry mouths, would just lock their gates and wait for them to leave or die. This wasn't like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has drama and intrigue. This was just a slow, stupid, meaningless agony. Every day, someone would fall by the side of the road and just not get up. They were left right there. Stephen's French army marched south toward Marseille. Nicholas's German army marched south over the Alps toward Italy. Crossing the Alps. To an American, they're just mountains. To these kids, it was hell on earth. Glaciers, avalanches, a cold that cracks your bones. Of the 20,000 who set out with Nicholas, barely a third made it to Italy. The rest were left behind, frozen into the mountains forever. And then they reached their goal, the sea. First, the French group. They arrive in Marseille. They stand on the shore for a day, 2 days, a week. They pray, they sing, they weep. The sea doesn't part. Imagine that disappointment. It's a physical thing. You can almost taste it. You walked hundreds of miles. You watched your friends die of starvation. You believed with every fiber of your being, and the miracle never came. God lied to you. Or worse, he just isn't there. And in this moment of total despair, when faith has collapsed and only a void remains, the businessmen show up. Their names were Hugh the Iron and William the Pig. History even remembered their names. They weren't demons from hell. They were pragmatic entrepreneurs. They didn't see a crowd of deluded children on the shore. They saw an asset, an unclaimed human resource. They approached the leaders and said, "You poor children, God is testing your faith. The sea didn't part because he wants you to reach the Holy Land on ships. We are pious merchants. We will give you 7 ships for free, out of charity." Free, the most dangerous word in any language. Thousands of exhausted, starving children are loaded onto these ships. They think it's their salvation, the next phase of the miracle. They are sailing toward their dream. A few days later, the fleet is caught in a storm off the coast of Sardinia. 2 ships sink, everyone on board, hundreds of children drowns. That was a tragedy. But what happened to the other 5 ships? That was business. The captains didn't set a course for Jerusalem. They set a course south to North Africa, to Algeria and Tunis, straight to the slave markets. Hugh the Iron and William the Pig had already cut a deal with Arab slave traders before they even offered their help. This wasn't an act of mercy. It was a cold, calculated business plan. They sold thousands of Christian children into slavery to Muslims. The irony is so dark it could blot out the sun. Some were bought as household servants, others for hard labor.
It's said that about 700 of them ended up in the caliph's court in Baghdad, where they were forced to study the sciences, being Europeans and therefore an exotic curiosity. Their lives were shattered. Their faith was trampled. They vanished from the pages of history, dissolved into the sands of a foreign land. That was the fate of the French Crusade. And what about Nicholas and his followers? They too reached the sea, in Genoa. It didn't part for them either. Part of his army just scattered, staying in Genoa as servants. But the most die-hard followers marched on, to Rome, to see the Pope. At the time, the Pope was Innocent III. This wasn't some kindly grandfather. This was one of the most powerful and ruthless politicians of his era. Think of him as the CEO of the world's largest and most influential corporation, the Catholic Church. And now, a mob of ragged, filthy, starving German kids shows up at his office in the Vatican. For him, this is a PR catastrophe. It's a living, breathing reminder of his policy's failures. It's an inconvenient, uncontrolled grassroots movement. It undermines his monopoly on holiness. He listened to them, and he delivered his verdict. It was cold, bureaucratic, and murderous in its essence. He praised them for their zeal, and then officially released them from their crusading vows. And then he said, "Go home."
Go home, hundreds of miles back, through the same hostile lands, across the same deadly mountains, but this time without hope, without a purpose, without faith. How many of them made it? A handful. Most died on the way, from starvation, disease, bandits. Their tiny spark of hope had first been fanned into an all-consuming fire, and then simply blown out by the cold breath of power. Nicholas's father, by the way, was hanged in Cologne by furious parents who never saw their children again. Nicholas himself was never seen again. So what was this? A flash of mass psychosis? A religious ecstasy? Or something more? Let's cut the mysticism. This was a story about a market. The market for hope. In a world that had nothing, faith was the only currency. And there were people who learned how to profit from it. Stephen and Nicholas, whoever they were, prophets or con artists, created a product called a miracle. They sold the idea that innocence could change the world, and people bought in. They invested the most precious thing they had in this startup, their children. And then the real players came along, the cynical merchants who saw not faith, but logistics, and the cold-blooded politician in Rome who saw not a pilgrimage, but a threat to his brand.
The official church tried to erase this story. It was an embarrassment, proof that the system didn't work, that the faith of the people could spiral out of control and lead to catastrophe. In textbooks, you'll read a couple of paragraphs about it, a strange, tragic event. But this wasn't just an event. This was a slaughter carried out not with swords, but with words, with greed and hatred disguised as piety. This is a story about what happens when desperation hits its limit. People will believe anything, and there will always be someone ready to cash in on that belief. It doesn't matter if you live in the 13th century or the 21st. The mechanisms don't change. Only the scenery does. It was one of the darkest and most naive chapters in history, a time when the faith of children was used against them, weaponized, and then sold at auction. Because in the end, the most terrifying truth is that in the game of power and money, innocence isn't a shield. It's just a commodity.